Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're digging into something a lot of people wonder about but rarely get real numbers on, where Americans actually go when they decide to pack up and leave the US for good. Depending on which source you check, somewhere between 5 and 10 million Americans currently live outside the country, and that's not counting military families or government workers stationed abroad. The State Department tends to land on the higher end of that range, while the United Nations counts closer to 5 million. The gap comes down to methodology. Some counts only include people who've actually picked up foreign citizenship, others include anyone who owns property overseas or spends most of the year outside the US. Bottom line, nobody has an exact figure, so everything here is an estimate built from a mix of census data and outside research through 2019. Before the pandemic scrambled migration patterns worldwide and put a pause on a trend that had been climbing steadily since 2016. So why leave in the first place? Money is the biggest factor by a wide margin. Roughly 60% of people who move abroad cite a lower cost of living or cheaper housing as their main reason. After that, the list gets more personal. Politics, being closer to family, relationships, and honestly some pretty random motivations too. I read about one guy who moved to Nigeria because someone there owed him money and he wanted to keep an eye on his investment. People have their reasons. Let's run through the top 10. Number 10, Italy. Italy checks a lot of boxes: incredible food, ancient cities around every corner, and weather that's hard to complain about for most of the year. On the cost of living side, if you set the US baseline at 100, Italy comes in around 58, meaning everyday expenses run roughly 40% cheaper than back home. Combine that with the lifestyle and it's easy to see why it pulls in so many expats, Americans and Canadians alike. Estimates put the number of long-term American residents in Italy somewhere between 60,000 and 82,000. Number 9, Peru. This one tends to catch people off guard. Peru has dramatic landscapes, the Amazon on one side, the Andes on the other, and a reputation for genuinely warm people. But the real draw is the price tag. Peru's cost of living index sits around 19, meaning a $100 basket of goods back home might run you about $19 there. One thing worth knowing if you're considering it: counterfeit currency gets handed to tourists fairly often in the cities, so it pays to learn the local money fast. Long term, somewhere between 56,000 and 84,000 Americans call Peru home. Number 8, France. Not exactly a shocker. France offers gorgeous architecture, legendary food and wine, and housing that's genuinely affordable outside of Paris and the Riviera. Those spots will cost you, but the rest of the country is a different story. The cost of living index lands around 66. As for the stereotype that the French are rude to outsiders, in my experience it's more that they have zero patience for rudeness themselves, so show up polite and you'll generally be treated the same way. Long-term estimates put the American population there between 59,000 and 97,000. Number 7, South Korea. South Korea has quietly been a popular destination for American expats since the 1980s, tech industry ties included. A lot of people land jobs there and end up staying even after the job ends. Yes, there's an ongoing standoff with North Korea just across the border, technically still a state of war after roughly 7 decades, but daily life in South Korea itself is stable and, frankly, pretty vibrant. South Koreans have a strong reputation for hospitality toward newcomers, and there's always some festival or event happening somewhere in the country. The cost of living index comes in around 54, about half of what you'd pay in the US. Winters can get cold depending on the region, but you do get all 4 seasons, which plenty of expats appreciate. Estimated long-term residents, 67,000 to 111,000. Number 6, Israel. Religion is the primary draw for a lot of people who relocate to Israel, but it's far from the only one. The country also has a booming tech sector and a cost of living index around 55. It's worth pushing back on the idea, often shaped by cable news, that Israel is some kind of constant war zone. The reality on the ground for most residents, most of the time, is calm daily life with pleasant weather. Between the affordability, the climate, and the spiritual significance, it pulls in a steady stream of American transplants, somewhere between 76,000 and 122,000 long-term residents. Number 5, Australia. Australians have a reputation for being relentlessly friendly, and from what I can tell, it mostly holds up. Weather and beach access are the biggest pull here. About 90% of the Australian population lives within roughly 20 miles of the coast. It's not the cheapest option on this list, with a cost of living index around 78, and moving further inland does bring cheaper land but often higher prices on everyday goods, since shipping things out to less populated areas adds cost, similar to how prices work in a place like Alaska. Still, somewhere between 114,000 and 145,000 Americans live there permanently. Number 4, Germany. This one surprises people. Germany doesn't get talked about as much as some other destinations, but it's had a steady flow of American residents for years. The cost of living index sits around 81, so it's not dramatically cheaper than the US. The real appeal is quality of life. Germans work some of the shortest average hours of any developed nation while still running one of Europe's strongest economies, and the universal healthcare system is a major draw. Life expectancy there runs about 2 years longer than in the US on average, and residents consistently report high satisfaction with their healthcare access. Estimated long-term American population, 127,000 to 142,000. Number 3, United Kingdom. No language barrier is a huge factor for Americans choosing England, Scotland, or Northern Ireland, even though plenty of other European countries have widespread English fluency too. Side note, yes, they're speaking English in Manchester, even if it takes your ear a minute to adjust. Beyond the language, comfort, healthcare, shared history, and cultural familiarity are the biggest draws. The cost of living index comes in around 63, better than a lot of people expect. Somewhere between 215,000 and 252,000 Americans live in the UK long-term. Number 2, Canada. This is the classic, if the election doesn't go my way, I'm moving to Canada, destination, and search interest in relocating there reliably spikes every election cycle. But healthcare access is really the biggest driver. Plenty of Americans who have zero interest in Canadian citizenship still cross the border regularly just to fill prescriptions at lower cost. Canadians pay higher taxes to fund that system, but they're largely insulated from the kind of medical bankruptcy that happens in the US. Despite those taxes, the overall cost of living index is around 71, cheaper than a lot of people assume. Long-term American residents in Canada, an estimated 270,000 to 312,000. Number 1, Mexico. For a lot of people this won't be surprising, and for others it'll be a total shock. Cost of living, climate, proximity to the US, food, and culture all play a role, but family ties matter just as much. Many Americans of Mexican descent relocate to be closer to relatives, whether that's after a deportation, a retirement decision, or just a shift back toward family roots that wasn't as common in past generations. Yes, Mexico deals with serious cartel-related violence in certain regions, but it's worth noting the US has its own serious crime problems that often get downplayed by comparison. The cost of living index in Mexico is around 26, meaning $100 worth of goods back home costs roughly $26 there. That affordability, paired with everything else, is a big part of why an estimated 762,000 to 900,000 Americans live in Mexico long-term, more than any other country on this list. That's the rundown. A lot of the usual suspects people expect to hear about, Thailand, the Philippines, and similar spots, don't crack this particular list, mostly because it's driven by raw population totals rather than per capita rates. If there's interest, a follow-up looking at the cheapest places to live per capita could be a fun angle. Let me know in the comments if that's something you'd want to see, and have a good one.